Hi there, welcome back to Haunting Vales. Tonight's mystery begins at the cheerful village Fête, where everyone saw each other, and yet someone was there whom no one could see. The air was filled with music, laughter, and the smell of fresh scones. Children ran between the stalls, neighbors chatted, and Miss Marple watched it all with her usual quiet attention. But then, strange things began to happen. A prize vanished from a locked booth. A woman screamed that someone brushed past her, though no one stood near. And in a photograph taken moments before, Miss Marple noticed a shadow behind a group of villagers, a shadow that did not belong to anyone present. The fete was supposed to be harmless fun, but someone had slipped in unnoticed, someone with a purpose far darker than celebration. Before we uncover who the unseen guest truly was, don't forget to subscribe for more chilling Miss Marple mysteries. Chapter 1. The Shadow Among the Bright Lights. The village of Hartwell had always adored its grand summer fete. Every year, the wide green at the center of the village brightened with banners, painted stalls, ribbons, and the excited chatter of families who had prepared for weeks. Children ran with paper windmills. The brass band warmed up with cheerful notes, and the scent of warm pies drifted through the air like a gentle invitation. Miss Jane Marple, dressed in her modest blue coat and soft gray hat, walked toward the green with her parasol in hand and a look of pleasant curiosity in her gentle eyes. She had attended countless fetes in her life, but each one held its own charm, its own quiet story waiting to be told. This year, however, she felt something else, something faint, something like the brush of a cold fingertip across the back of her mind, an unease that did not belong to a day so bright. She paused at the edge of the green. The band struck up a lively tune, children laughed, and the vicar waved at her with his usual warm smile. Everything looked right. Everything sounded right. Everything smelled like sweet summer and calm joy. And yet, something was wrong. Miss Marple's eyes moved slowly. She was never one to rush a thought or dismiss a whisper of instinct. She had learned long ago that the darkest truths often hid behind the brightest faces. It was not suspicion she felt now, only awareness. Her gaze settled on the farthest corner of the green, where a tall tent with striped canvas stood near the row of oak trees. Crowds passed by it with ease, but no one lingered there. The tent's entrance was partly open, making it look like a watchful eye, an eye waiting for something, or someone. Miss Marple continued toward the center of the fete, reminding herself that even an old instinct could be nothing more than the echo of too many mysteries solved across too many years. Still, she held the feeling close. Quietly, as she always did, she reached the pie stall just as Mrs. Havers, Hartwell's most enthusiastic baker, set down a tray of warm blackberry pastries. "Miss Marple, you must try one," she insisted cheerfully. "The secret is the sugar crust. It glows in the sunlight. It looks delightful," Miss Marple said, accepting a small slice with a kind smile. "You always manage to make the simple things so splendid." Mrs. Havers waved her hand. "Oh, nonsense. But tell me, dear, you look as if something's on your mind." Miss Marple tasted the pie and gave a soft nod of approval before she answered. "Not on my mind exactly. More like a whisper in the air. Tell me, Mrs. Havers, has everything been peaceful in the village? No troubles leading up to today?" Mrs. Havers blinked. "Troubles? Why, no. Not unless you count the vicar's dog knocking over the lemonade barrels yesterday." Miss Marple chuckled gently. "A very different sort of trouble indeed." "Well, try to enjoy yourself," Mrs. Havers insisted. "You work your mind too hard, always solving something or other." Miss Marple promised that she would. But as she moved through the fete, greeting people she had known for decades, her sense of unease only grew. She stopped at the ring toss game, where a tall man with sharp eyes and a stiff, uneasy posture stood alone. He was not a villager. His plain brown coat was tidy but worn, and his hands kept tightening and loosening at his sides as though he were bracing himself for a sudden blow. Miss Marple watched him quietly. His eyes were not focused on the game. They were focused beyond it, drifting, searching, waiting. He noticed her gaze and quickly turned away, walking briskly into the crowd. Miss Marple followed him with her eyes until he vanished behind the stalls. A stranger with a guilty conscience, she thought, or perhaps only a man with too many worries and too little rest. But something about him stirred that faint whisper again. She moved on, passing by the fortune-teller's tent, the cake competition area, and the stage where the brass band prepared to begin their performance. Everything unfolded like a bright tapestry of community joy until she heard the first scream. It rose from the far side of the green, a sharp, sudden cry that ripped through the lively music and laughter. People turned. Gasps followed. Someone shouted for help. Miss Marple moved at once, her steps quick but steady, her parasol tapping lightly against the ground. She followed the crowd that gathered near the row of oak trees, near the striped tent she had noticed earlier. The scream had come from there. Inside the tent, a woman stood trembling near a long wooden table. Her hands shook violently as she pointed toward something on the ground. Miss Marple stepped forward. A man lay motionless at the base of the tent pole. His hat had rolled beside him, and his eyes stared blankly upward. His chest did not rise or fall. His pale face had a strange stillness, the stillness of someone who had not simply fainted. The vicar knelt beside him, checking his pulse with trembling fingers. After several seconds, he looked up with a pale, stricken expression. He is gone. The crowd murmured, fear swelling like a dark cloud. Miss Marple knelt carefully beside the body. She did not touch him yet. She only looked, observed, noted. The ground beneath him was undisturbed. No marks, no sign of struggle. The man's coat was neat. His hands were stiff. His posture showed he had collapsed quickly, without time to brace himself. She glanced up. The oak branches overhead cast shifting shadows through the canvas walls of the tent. Then her eyes moved to the back corner of the tent, where a small slit tore through the canvas. A slit no larger than a hand, and yet it was fresh. The fibers still curled slightly at the edge. Miss Marple looked at the vicar. "Who is he?" I do not know," the vicar whispered. "I have never seen him before." The woman who had screamed stepped forward. "I saw him enter the tent. He didn't speak to anyone. He just stepped inside, and a moment later, I heard him fall." Miss Marple nodded slowly. A stranger enters the tent alone. A stranger collapses without a sound. A stranger dies without a mark on him. Something quiet and cold settled in her heart. She stood and examined the edges of the tent again, the shadows, the slit, the corner where the canvas bowed inward slightly, as though someone had pressed against it recently. The villagers whispered anxiously behind her. Was it a heart attack? Do you think it was poison? What if someone at the Fête did this? Miss Marple held up her hand gently, calming them with her calm presence. "We must not jump to conclusions," she said. "The truth will show itself if we observe with care." She turned back to the body. The man's brown coat, his worn shoes, the faint trace of dust on his sleeve. Not dust from the green, but from the old footpath near the forest edge. He had come a long way, but why? And why die here, in a tent no one used, at a fête full of strangers? The sound of approaching footsteps pulled her from her thoughts. Constable Graham hurried into the tent, his face flushed with worry. "Everyone clear away, please." "Miss Marple, what happened?" Miss Marple told him quietly. Graham knelt beside the body, shaking his head as he examined the scene. "I'll have to get the inspector. But you look as if you already see something I don't." Miss Marple smiled softly. "I see very little so far, Graham. but what I do see tells me something simple and troubling. What's that? Miss Marple looked at the slit in the tent canvas, at the man's still body, at the shadows cast by the oak branches overhead. Someone else was here, she said in a low voice. Someone who did not want to be seen. Graham swallowed. Do you think he was killed? Miss Marple did not answer at once. She looked again at the man's face, peaceful, empty, without struggle. Finally she spoke, softly, slowly, as though she were speaking to the air itself. No man dies without reason, and a man does not choose to die in an empty tent at a village fete. Her eyes narrowed ever so slightly, and no one leaves a slit in a tent by accident. The villagers behind her shivered. The brass band, unaware, continued their lively tune on the other side of the green, the bright music drifting through the air like a cruel contrast to the shadow now settling over Hartwell. Miss Marple stepped out of the tent and looked across the green, at the crowds, at the bright stalls, at the joyful chaos of the fete. Somewhere among them, she knew, was the unseen guest, the one who had come here with a purpose, the one who had made certain the stranger would not walk out of that tent again. Miss Marple tightened her grip on her parasol. The fete was no longer a celebration. It was a stage, and someone had already played their first dark move. The unseen guest had come to Hartwell, and Miss Marple intended to uncover their face before they struck again. Chapter 2. The footsteps no one heard. The oak trees behind the striped tent swayed softly in the warm breeze as Miss Marple stepped outside. She moved with calm purpose, though inside her thoughts were already organizing themselves in careful lines. For her, a strange death was never a single event. It was a chain made of small links, and the first link had already formed in that quiet tent. Constable Graham stood a few steps behind her, trying his best to look authoritative while keeping the crowd at bay. "Everyone, please stay away from the tent," he called out. "Inspector Hale will arrive shortly. Until then, keep calm." Calm was a generous word. Panic simmered beneath the surface, hidden only by social manners and the presence of children. Miss Marple saw stiff shoulders, tight jaws, restless hands, and the unmistakable look of people who desperately wanted answers. She walked toward the nearest oak tree, where the grass grew longer. She lowered her parasol and bent slowly, observing the ground with her usual patience. A faint indentation interrupted the smooth pattern of the grass. A footprint, light, almost delicate. She brushed her fingertips along the edge without disturbing it. A shoe print with a narrow heel. A woman's shoe. Not fresh, but not old either. Miss Marple slowly turned her head, scanning the crowd, now gathered near the green. Women in bright dresses laughed nervously, clutching their shawls or holding their children's hands, while older ladies whispered in worried circles. Any one of them could have stepped behind this tent earlier. Many had come and gone since the fete began. But this footprint did not belong to just any woman. It belonged to someone who had stood here in hesitation. The grass had been pressed once, and then again, deeper, as though the person had shifted their weight while watching the tent from this exact angle. A watcher, a silent one. She rose and looked back toward the slit in the canvas. The angle matched perfectly. Someone had lingered outside the tent, hidden by the oaks, watching the man inside. Watching long enough to leave two small but distinct marks in the grass. Miss Marple turned as a soft voice broke her thoughts. "Miss Marple, are you all right?" It was Clara Rudd, a young woman who had recently moved to Hartwell. She stood nervously twisting the edge of her apron. Her gray eyes were wide with fear. "Is it true? Someone said a man died in the tent." "Yes, my dear. The constable is handling it." Clara swallowed. "Do they know what happened?" "Not yet," Miss Marple said gently. "But I believe he did not die alone." Clara's face grew pale. "You mean someone hurt him?" Miss Marple did not answer. She simply patted Clara's hand and walked past her, heading toward the back of the tent again. The villagers continued whispering, the hum of their conversations circling the green like a troubled wind. Behind the bandstand, a group of teenagers tried to continue their game of toss the ring, but their movements were distracted and uneasy. Miss Marple stepped behind the tent fully, where the canvas met the shadow of the trees. The air felt cooler here, calmer, as though the noise of the fete could not reach this small pocket of shade. And just a few steps away, she found the next clue, a small thread, snagged on the edge of the torn canvas. She leaned in. The thread was soft, almost silky, dyed a vibrant red. Not from the tent. The tent stripes were blue and white. Not from the man's coat, either. He wore dull brown. This thread belonged to someone else entirely. Footsteps behind her made her straighten gently. Constable Graham approached. Miss Marple, Inspector Hale just arrived. He wants to speak with you. Of course, she said, touching the parasol lightly to the ground before following Graham back toward the green. Inspector Hale, tall, broad-shouldered, and known for his brisk, almost impatient manner, stood beside the entrance of the tent, his eyes sweeping the scene with practiced intensity. He turned as Miss Marple approached. Miss Marple, he greeted with a respectful nod. Graham tells me you were the first to look over the scene. She nodded. I was among the first inside, yes. And? Hale asked. He always preferred direct answers. Miss Marple folded her hands. The man did not struggle. He collapsed quickly. His posture shows surprise rather than fear. Poison, perhaps, Hale muttered. Perhaps, Miss Marple agreed. But I believe someone else was near the tent just moments before he died. Hale raised an eyebrow. Because of the slit in the canvas? And a few other observations. She looked toward the oaks. Someone was behind the tent. Someone who wanted to see the man inside without being seen. Do you believe this person harmed him? I believe, Miss Marple said gently, that no one watches another person in secret unless they have a reason. Hale fronet. Did you see anything else? Yes, she answered softly. A woman's footprint, and a single thread from a garment. Red, bright red. Hale turned to Constable Graham. Search the area. Look for anyone wearing red, scarf, dress, shawl, anything. Several villagers overheard the request and immediately began glancing at one another. A few women instinctively tugged at their clothing or folded their arms as if suddenly self-conscious. Miss Marple stayed quiet, observing. Across the green, a slow movement caught her eye. A woman in a long red shawl, her face partially hidden by the fabric, paced near the lemonade stall. She kept her head down, avoiding the tent area altogether. Miss Marple recognized her. Martha Chilton, a woman known for her sharp tongue and colder temper. Not cruel, but secretive, reserved, always watching others, but rarely allowing others to watch her. The red shawl, draped along her shoulders, fluttered in the wind. Miss Marple waited until Hale sent Graham to speak with the lemonade vendor. Then she moved calmly toward Martha. The woman stiffened when Miss Marple approached. Good afternoon, Martha, Miss Marple said warmly. Martha nodded, but her eyes darted nervously toward the tent. Terrible thing, this? Terrible. You seem troubled, Miss Marple said gently. Everyone's troubled, Martha snapped, then caught herself. It's just shocking. Miss Marple's gaze lowered to Martha's shoes, small, with narrow heels. Shoes that could make the exact footprint she had seen. You were near the oaks earlier, Miss Marple said, not accusingly but simply as a truth. A flicker of panic crossed Martha's face. I walk there often. The shade helps my headaches. Of course, Miss Marple said. And did you see the man who entered the tent before he died? Martha hesitated. She looked down at her shawl, tightening it around her shoulders. No, she whispered. I didn't see anything. Miss Marple didn't press her. Not yet. Instead, she offered a gentle smile. If you remember anything at all, do tell the inspector. Martha nodded again, but her hands trembled as she adjusted the shawl. Miss Marple noticed another thread at the edge, frayed, vibrant red. She stepped away, her suspicions sharpening. But suspicions were not proof. Not yet. Before Miss Marple could return to the tent, a deep voice called out across the green. "Stop right there. Don't move." Inspector Hale strode past several stalls, following a frantic shout from near the bandstand. Miss Marple followed at a steady pace. A small group had gathered near the far bench, where an older man stood holding a small tin box. The man looked terrified. "I found this," he said, holding the tin as though it might bite him. "Behind the tent, near the oaks." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. Hale took the box carefully. "What is this?" "I don't know," the man whispered, "but it was half buried near the roots." The inspector opened it slowly. Inside were small white tablets. Plain, round, unscented. Not medicine, not sweets, nothing labeled. Just a quiet box of possibilities. Miss Marple stepped closer. "Inspector," she said calmly, "I believe those tablets could be important." "You think they're poison?" Hale asked. "They could be. Or they could be something entirely harmless," she said. "But someone hid them. That alone speaks loudly." Hale closed the lid. "Graham, take this to the station and get it examined." "Yes, sir." As Graham hurried away with the tin, Miss Marple turned toward the striped tent, her thoughts deepening. A dead man, a slit in the canvas, a watcher outside, a woman in red. Hi Dundee, a stranger with frightened eyes. A village fete full of noise and color, masking something cold beneath. The bright summer day had begun like a celebration. Now was a stage set for secrets. And someone, somewhere among these familiar faces, had written a plan in careful, quiet steps. Miss Marple breathed steadily, letting the warm air fill her lungs as she watched the crowd. Then she saw something. A man running, not toward the exit, but away from the tent. His coat flapped behind him. His face was pale, his movements frantic. Miss Marple recognized him instantly. The tall stranger she had seen earlier at the ring toss. The one who avoided her gaze. The one who seemed disturbed before the death even occurred. He sprinted past the crowd and disappeared behind the bakery stall. Inspector Hale shouted, "After him!" Constable Graham gave chase. Miss Marple did not run. She walked with certainty, knowing the truth often revealed itself not in the chase, but in the traces left behind. She headed toward the bakery stall. Behind it, she found what she expected. Another footprint, pressed deep, fresh, and beside it, a slip of paper fallen from a pocket in haste. She picked it up carefully. On the paper was a name she recognized, the dead man's. Miss Marple stared at the paper, her breath steady but her heartbeat sharp. The stranger had known him. The stranger had been watching him long before he entered that tent. The stranger had run, not because he was guilty, but because someone else wanted him to be afraid. Someone who hid behind oak trees. Someone who wore red. Someone who had torn the canvas. Someone who had watched a man die in silence. The unseen guest. Miss Marple closed her fingers around the paper. "Inspector Hale," she whispered to herself, "you are chasing the wrong person." She lifted her head toward the far stalls, where Martha Chilton had just vanished behind the pottery booth. Quietly, calmly, Miss Marple followed. The unseen guest was no longer unseen. Not to her. Chapter 3. The Face Behind the Shadow. The pottery booth stood at the far end of the village green, half shadowed by the tall hedge that bordered the lane. Its tables were covered in an assortment of hand-painted bowls, vases, and tiny figurines meant to charm visitors into spending a few coins. But now, those tables felt more like a barrier, a thin wall separating the ordinary cheer of the Fête from the darker truth unfolding behind them. Miss Marple reached the booth and slowed her steps, her parasol tapping softly on the packed earth. Martha Chilton had slipped behind this booth only seconds earlier. The woman's red shawl had swung sharply behind her, the bright color too vivid to blend fully into hiding. Miss Marple stepped around the edge and found Martha standing alone in the narrow space between the hedge and the back of the booth. Her shoulders shook slightly. Her hands clutched the shawl so tightly that her knuckles had gone white. "Martha," Miss Marple said in her warm, steady voice, "there is nowhere to run, my dear." Martha startled, then pressed herself back against the hedge as though hoping it would swallow her whole. Her breathing was short, uneven. "I didn't hurt him," Martha whispered. "I swear I didn't." Miss Marple tilted her head gently. "I never said you did." Martha blinked, confused. "But the inspector—" "Graham, everyone's looking at me." "No," Miss Marple said softly. "They're chasing a frightened man who ran. But I know better. Running does not prove guilt, nor does fear. Many people run from things they did not cause." Martha's mouth trembled. "Then why did you follow me?" Miss Marple stepped closer. "Because you saw something, and you were terrified to speak of it." Martha's eyes filled with tears. She dropped her shawl slightly, her hands shaking uncontrollably. "I didn't know what to do," she whispered. "I thought if I said something, people would think I had a part in it." "Tell me, Martha," Miss Marple said gently. "What did you see behind the tent?" Martha swallowed hard. "A shape. Someone standing there. I couldn't make out the face, but the person had a coat. Long, dark, and they moved like they didn't want anyone to notice." Miss Marple nodded slowly. "A watcher. Waiting." "Yes," Martha said. "I went near the oaks because the shade helps my headaches. I was there before the man walked into the tent, and I saw that other person slip behind the canvas. Not inside, but close enough to touch it." Miss Marple's eyes softened. "Did you recognize the shape? The height? Anything?" Martha hesitated, then whispered, I think it was a man." Miss Marple observed her for a moment. The tremble in her voice, the sincerity in her expression, the honest confusion. Martha was hiding out of fear, not guilt. And the red thread on the canvas? That, Miss Marple knew now, was nothing more than coincidence. The shawl had brushed the canvas earlier when Martha approached the tent out of curiosity, not malice. "You did nothing wrong," Miss Marple said, "but you saw someone who did something deliberate." Martha nodded weakly. "I tried to leave. I try not to get involved. But then he died and I panicked." "Yes," Miss Marple said gently, "and now you must not hide any longer." Before Martha could respond, a voice shouted from the green. "There, near the stalls. Don't let him escape." Miss Marple turned sharply. Constable Graham and 2 village men were chasing the tall stranger she had noticed earlier. He was sprinting through the crowd with wild desperation, pushing past families and leaping over a crate of pies that toppled to the ground. "Stay here," Miss Marple told Martha. "Do not move from this spot." Miss Marple stepped back onto the green, walking swiftly but steadily around the booths. The stranger dashed toward the lane at the far end, but Inspector Hale cut him off from the other side. The man skidded to a stop, cornered. "It wasn't me," he shouted, his voice cracking with fear. "I didn't kill him." "Then why run?" "Hale barkit." "Because someone is after me," the man cried. A hush fell over the crowd. Miss Marple approached, her expression calm. "Let him speak, Inspector." "Hale site put aside relustantly." "Fine." But he had the dead man's name written on a paper in his pocket. Miss Marple held out her hand. Hale placed the folded slip into it. She opened it and read the name again. The same name. The dead man's name. She turned to the stranger. "You knew him." The stranger swallowed hard. His eyes were red with panic, but his voice held a trembling truth. "Yes, I knew him. His name is Samuel Dart. He was my employer." "Your employer?" Hale repeated. Yes, the man said. I came to warn him. Warn him? Miss Marple asked, her tone gentle. The man nodded. I recognize someone here. Someone dangerous. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly. And who might that be? The man looked around the crowd in terror. I don't know his name. Samuel never gave it to me. But he called him the guest. He said the guest would seek him out one day. I didn't believe him. Not until today. The crowd murmured uneasily. Miss Marple's mind unfolded the pieces like a quiet map. A man with a secret. A watcher in the trees. A silent death with no marks. A stranger with knowledge of danger. A woman in red who saw a shadow. A slit in a canvas made to watch the victim's final moment. She looked at the stranger again. Tell me everything from the beginning. He took a shuddering breath. Samuel Dart worked with valuable items, documents, things people would pay a great deal of money to hide or reveal. He told me months ago that someone from his past might follow him one day. He never told me why. He only said the man would come when everything looked safe, when he least expected it. And today, Miss Marple said softly, seemed safe. The stranger nodded. I saw him. The same man Samuel described. I saw him near the oaks, watching the tent. The crowd gasped. Inspector Hale City Fête. Describe him. Tall, dark coat, hat pulled low, and he moved like he knew exactly what he was doing. Miss Marple lifted her eyes slowly toward the green. The Fête was buzzing with fear now. People turning, searching, doubting. But all too easily, fear made one overlook the simplest truth. A killer does not vanish in a thin air. A killer hides in plain sight. Her eyes swept the green. The bandstand, the stalls, the clusters of villagers, the tree shadows. And then she saw him, a man in a dark coat, standing near the edge of the green. Not running, not pushing, not hiding behind anything. He stood carefully behind a group of children, head lowered, pretending to study the raffle board. He was using the noise and panic as cover. He was waiting for the right moment to slip away. Quietly, carefully, deliberately. The unseen guest. Miss Marple stepped forward, raising her voice not in panic, but in absolute calm. Inspector Hale. The inspector turned. Yes. The man you want is behind the raffle board. Dark coat. Hut. Standing very still. Hale spun around, eyes wide. Graham, come with me. But the man had already sensed the shift in attention. He bolted. The crowd screamed. Children were swept aside by frightened parents. The man pushed through a line of tables, sending cups and cloth flying. Graham raced after him. Hale circled around to cut him off. Miss Marple watched, not moving. She knew where the man was heading. The lane. The quiet exit from the green. The perfect escape route. But perfect plans falter when someone understands a mind behind them. Miss Marple turned and walked swiftly across the grass. The killer was fast, but she knew the precise angle he would take, the exact corner he would slip around, the moment he would hesitate before darting into open ground. She reached the corner first. The man rounded it at full speed and froze. Miss Marple stood before him, her parasol planted firmly into the ground. He tried to dodge left, but Inspector Hale burst through the hedge. He tried to dodge right, but Graham grabbed him by the coat. The man thrashed, wild with desperation, but the officers forced him to the ground. It's over, Miss Marple said softly. The man looked up at her, hatred in his eyes. How did you know? Miss Marple's voice was calm. Because you were the only one who made no noise at all. No chatter, no greetings, no excitement. A fate is loud, joyful. Even shy people mumble something. But you moved through it like a shadow, and shadows cling to the edges of things. The man snarled. That old fool should have known better than to come here. Inspector Hale snapped. Why kill him? He betrayed me, the man hissed. Years ago, he took something that wasn't his. He knew I would come. And so he came to a village fete, Miss Marple said gently. The one place no one expects violence. The man glared up at her, defeated. Graham secured his wrists. As the crowd reacted, fear turning into relief, relief into exhausted chatter. Miss Marple stepped back. Martha emerged from behind the pottery booth, shaking but safe. The stranger who knew Samuel Dart sank onto a bench, overwhelmed. And slowly, the day regained its shape. Not the same shape it had held before the death, but a quieter, sobered version. The band stopped playing. The stalls reopened hesitantly. The children laughed again, though with shorter steps and watchful parents nearby. Miss Marple stood in the midst of it all, her parasol gently resting against her side. The unseen guest had been seen at last, and Hartwell, small as it was, had survived a shadow passing through. Inspector Hale Aprorochiter. Miss Marple, I don't know how you do it. She smiled softly. It was not me alone, Inspector. It was many small truths, all whispering the same thing. He nodded, almost in awe. The village is lucky to have you. No, Miss Marple said. I am lucky to have a village that listens. She walked toward the edge of the green, watching the children chase each other through the sunshine. Even after a shadow passes, the world finds a way to shine again. If you enjoyed this mystery, remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with others who love a good detective story. Your support helps keep these tales alive, and many more mysteries are waiting.